Well, Zach, thank you. I appreciate you for joining me. Man, I had time to be able to look at some of the things that you're doing, and it just moved me so much. Brother, if I can give you a virtual hug, I would, if I could. So thank you for joining. This is that therapy corner and stuff like that. This is my podcast where I just want you to know, and I don't know if I mentioned that I am a marriage and family therapist. So I do work as a therapist full time. Um,
Oh, okay.
yes, yes. So I do that full time, and I'm also a mental health and a substance use therapist. But I work with the adolescent and teen population in the state of Utah, and um, so this is just it's very very important to continue to hear your words and stuff like that. So I really was excited after I seen a couple of your YouTubes that you was on and stuff like that. And all I can say is you definitely, and you probably heard these things before, but a true testament of resilience. And
Thanks,
this is
man.
the opportunity I want to be able to share to my audience and also just continue to more people who just going to continue to listen, and follow you. So this is the time that you get to continue to shine, and you've been doing amazing things. So thank you for coming on my platform and be able to continue to share some of your words of wisdom and just things that you've been through. So I appreciate you giving me that opportunity.
Yeah, we're gonna have plenty to talk about with our crossover here, for
Yes,
sure. Thanks
yes.
for having me on.
You're welcome, welcome. So first and foremost, please tell me a little bit about like the early life of Zach. What was that like, and where are you from?
I grew up all over the place. I'm a military brat. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved. I think we'd moved 10 times by the time that I graduated high school. And so it was to different states and stuff. But
Wow.
so I was born in Montana, graduated high school in Colorado, and that's where I live now. I came back to Colorado after I got out of the Marines. But yeah, I grew up moving all over the place, playing sports, and was an only child for the first half of my childhood. And then I have a younger sister who has Down syndrome. She's 11 years younger than me. And that was most of my childhood was pretty much moving, school, and sports. I've always been an athlete, and that's just been a huge part of my life.
Man, it's amazing that you just been kind of bounced around. I never been to Colorado, and I'm in the state of Utah, so it's not really that far from there. And I always got to make my way to the Rocky States and stuff, but you're just really right there, so that's just really interesting. So just knowing that you in that state, I know just reading up your history and seeing you all for like the snow atmosphere.
Yeah, I love it, man. I mean, there's a reason that I moved back here. This was out of everywhere that I lived growing up. This was my favorite spot. And I was only out here for 2 years before I graduated high school. But
Okay.
something about the mountains, something about the mountains.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll let you have all the mountains. I'm originally from New York City. So,
Okay.
so these mountains, like I never went snowboarding or anything like that. I'm just a city person, but I love the snow and stuff like that. And a lot of people are fascinated with the mountains, snowboarding and skiing and stuff. So hats off to you to enjoy that. And I'm sure you get plenty of snow up there and you probably be shredding a lot up there. So that is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I had the fear. That's my thing. I'm just too afraid to get on those things and do those things like that. But it's amazing that you do those things.
Well, I might have the advantage on that because I can't see what's going
Oh,
on. So there's nothing to be scared of.
that's true. That's true. You
Yeah.
just going with the wind.
Yeah. I'm just going with the flow.
That's awesome, awesome, man. Well, keep telling you to doing that. So I'd like to know, like, what made you end up going into the military?
It was something that I always wanted to do. And part of that was wanting to be like my dad, but that's also just both sides of my family. That's traditionally what the men have done. I didn't know what branch I wanted to go into,
Okay.
but eventually, I think like every kid growing up that wants to go in the military, I was like, I'm going to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
And so especially when we moved to Colorado, we were only living like 30 or 45 minutes north of the Air Force Academy. And that was my junior year of high school. And so I talked with a liaison from the Air Force Academy and told her, like, yeah, I'm an athlete. I do all these things and I want to be a fighter pilot. And she started talking about grades and needing this long volunteer service history and a 4.0. And math is the bane of my existence and always
Mine
has
too.
been. So the I got straight A's in school outside of math. And so that I was like, okay, that dream's gone. And then I don't know what it was. For some reason, my brain went from, okay, if I can't be a fighter pilot, I want to be a ground pounder. So I wanted to be an infantryman in the Marines. And that's what I wound up doing. I started talking with a recruiter when I was 16, and he was like, "Hey man, you're too young. You got to come back in a year. You can talk to us in a year, and at least I still can't do anything with you, but we can start getting you into our delayed enlistment program workouts and stuff like that." And that's what I wound up doing. I ended up leaving for boot camp, I don't know, maybe 2 months after I graduated high school. And that was, yeah, there was never any other thought in my mind of what I was going to do. The only question was if I was going to go to college first and become an officer or go enlisted. And after the Air Force Academy thing, I decided to go enlisted.
Wow. I mean, hats off to you. I have relatives and my grandfather, served in the military and stuff like that. And I just realized it wasn't really for me. Like I wasn't like somebody said, "Hey, take this ASVAB test." And I'm like, like
Yeah.
no, no. And I'm with you. Like where math wasn't my strong suit, even though I have my master's degree and I had to take certain math classes, I was like, man, do I ever need this as a therapist? And I'm like, I don't think I will ever need
Nope.
this type of math. But it's no way around the getting around math. So how many tours did you do, or how many yeah, how many times you went back and forth?
I deployed twice, but I didn't see any combat. Both of my
Okay.
deployments were into the Pacific. So the Marine Corps, we call them MEUs. It's Marine Expeditionary Units. And so they'll deploy an infantry battalion alongside the other supporting units needed, whether that's in terms of air support, indirect fires like artillery and stuff like that, transportation units. And we go float around on ships. That's why the Marines are an amphibious force. They always traditionally have been and have been a landing force. And so we load up on naval ships. And that's why we always say the Navy sailors were our taxi drivers. And so my first deployment was it was 6 months. It was to Okinawa, Japan. It was the first 2 months we spent training in the jungle. Second 2 months we went to the main island of Japan and trained in the snow on Mount Fuji. And then the last 2 months we're back in the jungle in Okinawa. And then the second deployment was a MEU, the 31st MEU. And that was when Kim Jong-un was getting kind of squirrely. And so you're basically out there floating around on ship. It's a big flotilla. All these units are spread across a whole group of ships, and we trained with the Australians, we trained with the Japanese, and you're over there in case something kicks off. So the idea being that if Kim Jong-un decided to do something stupid, we would be the first ones to go in, and thankfully I didn't have to. So yeah.
I mean, to me, that's an amazing. Even just being out there, like, what is that like? Being from the U.S. and just kind of going out there. What was the adjustment to their life? Because I'm assuming the way of living there and their world is totally different from ours.
Japanese culture is so different because it's not a westernized culture.
Mhm.
And it's different because the language is so foreign. I mean, even their alphabet is foreign. It's not a Latin-based language. So we really didn't have like we're on our bases when we're over there, and you can leave base, but there's really not a ton of interaction there, and they weren't the biggest fans, and still aren't. We're still, this is all a byproduct of World War II that we even have bases on their land, and they weren't allowed to have a real standing military, like a real force for a long, long time. I think it was just within the past couple of years that they've been able to finally stand their military back up and start to ramp it back up. So kind of tense in that aspect, but it was really neat. There's all these old castles and there's so much history there. I mean, you really forget in Asia, there those cultures go so far back, and it was just in that sense, it was really neat. Australia was really cool. Um, the outback sucked, but the jungle sucks more. So, but it was, the Australians were so welcoming, and that's like being in America, just everyone else has cool accents and you don't. It was really, really cool. And it's been something I've started to travel since getting out of the military, really in the last like 2 years. I've started getting to travel out of the country just for fun purposes, not for work. And it's something like it's a totally different gear when it's in that regard, when you're not with the military in a foreign country. So I really enjoy it a lot more now. Not that I didn't then. It's better now.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, man. It's good to hear that because not a lot of people got those firsthand perspective of what that is, just life out there. So I'm curious, like for any other maybe youth or people in, at the time that you was trying to pursue getting into services, like what is an advice you can give them so that way it can help better prepare them to figure out what they want to do or what direction they may want to go, what branch.
Like specifically, like, if they want to join the military,
Yeah.
I would say if you want to be an infantryman, that leaves you with the Army or the Marine Corps. I'm a Marine, so I'm always going to say the Marine Corps is better. That's the Marine Corps is a big cult of personality. I don't know if you've been around a lot of vets or active duty service members, but there's a beef internally within the military between all the branches, and the Marine Corps is top dog. So I'm biased. I'm biased, but I have to say go in the Marines. But realistically, I enlisted because I didn't feel like I was ready to go to college. That's really your big options are go to college first and become an officer, or go straight out of high school and enlist like I did. And you just end up in a different layer of the hierarchy. If you're an officer, you're in charge. And if you're ready to go to college straight out of high school, if that's even what you want to do, you don't have to go get a degree, but to be an officer in the military, you do.
Gotcha.
Um, I would say your life is going to be easier and you're going to get paid more if you're an officer, but there's a lot of respect for enlisting and going and doing the difficult things, and you will come out a more mature person. The Marine Corps is going to be a little more hardcore than you would see in something like the Air Force or especially the Coast Guard and the Space Force. There's a reason that the Marine Corps has that reputation, but there's a lot of pride that comes with that too.
Gotcha. Yeah, I used to work at a behavioral hospital where they had a unit that was all for like vets. And I used to hear the back and forth all the time. And I was like this, lost. Like,
Yeah,
wait, what?
it's
Like
constant.
yeah, I couldn't really keep up because I didn't necessarily notice the difference and stuff. But at the end of the day, I still seen no matter what branch they were still united. It didn't matter. They didn't care. Even though the rivalry is there, that's just like for some
It's
police
friendly.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's like some police officers may have certain rivalries with fire departments, right? They might have like certain games that they go against each other, but at the end of the day, they have that brotherhood. So it was amazing just seeing that, and I had so many different stories I'm hearing about. I was like, man, like these are things that you can't never get just get. So just being around these type of people, I was definitely hearing those things. But it sounds very very competitive, but it sounds like also like a brotherhood at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, and it's neat. I mean, if if I'm having a conversation with anyone and it comes up that they're a vet too, like we immediately have some common ground and there's a connection there. It doesn't matter. I mean, maybe if you were Space Force, I'll probably look down on you. But outside of that, like outside of that, there is. It's just you have that common connection. It's neat. It's doesn't matter where you go. It's always there.
That's awesome, awesome. So you did your deployment and stuff like that. What was it like just adjusting back to just civilian life, back to reality, I guess.
I had, you mean like after, like as I was getting out of the Marines?
Yeah, yeah.
I had a bit of a rough time. So I, on my second deployment, or I guess before my second deployment, I had married my girlfriend. So we got married before I deployed the second time. And then near the tail end of that deployment, I got a message from a woman that I didn't know, letting me know that her husband and my wife were having an affair.
Oh.
So, yeah, so I was still overseas. And as you can imagine, that was a mess.
Hmm.
But we tried to make it work when, after the dust kind of settled, once I was home, tried to make it work for a brief period and I just couldn't. The trust was gone. So I ended up filing for divorce. And about a month after that, I was in a really, really nasty motorcycle accident and had a really bad head injury that kind of sent me spiraling.
Hmm.
Obviously, I wasn't in a good place
Yeah.
knowing that my wife had been cheating on me and now I'm getting divorced. But I was dealing with it and I was just keeping myself really busy, and going to the racetrack was part of that. And when I was in that accident, that concussion, I've had other concussions before. That one, up until the the one that I got from shooting myself in the head, was absolutely the worst that I've ever had. And it changed things for me. I became very agitative. I really started to struggle with depression and I couldn't sleep. And instead of talking about it and seeking help, I tried self-medicating with alcohol and it caught up with me. So that accident was in March of 2018. I finished my service in August of 2018 and was honorably discharged, got out and started going to school. And in March of 2019, that entire year, I had been struggling. And by the time that March 31st of 2019 rolled around, yeah, I didn't want to be here anymore. I was working full time and going to school full time and keeping up appearances, but I was struggling inside and still just continuing to try and self-medicate. And I ended up putting a gun between my eyes and pulling the trigger. And that's what blinded me.
Man, and that's just that moves me to just understand, like, you coming back and hoping that, I'm gonna be able to start a family probably, right? And trying to make things work. And and this is something to where I really try to help other people understand what mental health and substance use does go hand in hand, because
Absolutely.
sometimes people, like you said, self-medicate or just cope, right? And your choice was alcohol, and I try to educate people on that. Like, depression is real, anxiety is real. When we feel like we at an ends with, we think about what we need to do to not feel that way. And so, for you to get to that point and decided, what, I'm just not going to deal with that anymore. And
And
go ahead, sorry.
no, you go ahead. I'll
Um,
say after you.
so I guess I was just curious, like with the gunshot, was that the thing that blinded you?
Yeah, and I want to take a second to step back a little bit and kind of add to what you said. You know, just I try and communicate this in a way that other people can understand because I didn't understand it until I was there. I've got suicide on both sides of my family, and I thought people who chose that way out were selfish and cowards. But by the time that I had reached that point, you're not in a sane state of mind. Like you said, all you're looking for is a way out. You don't, there's not even not a single thought of hey, what is this going to do to someone else? Like I my family was at my house the day before I shot myself, and I kept up the appearances, and even though I had already decided a couple days beforehand that I was going to shoot myself. But you would think someone in a sane state of mind, you would think that might snap them out and be like, okay, maybe I should tell these people right now. Or even like minutes before I shot myself, I left my room and talked to my roommate like nothing was wrong when, so basically, I had been at home. I was recording a suicide video to my family. I thought that was more personal than a suicide note. He got home early from work and he was out in the kitchen cooking his dinner and stuff. So I went out and talked to him. I paused the video and went out and talked to him like nothing was wrong. And then we were talking and just seeing how his day went and all that stuff, and asked him if he was gonna hop on Xbox later. And he's like, "Yeah, I'll finish my dishes and then I'll be on." And he finished what he was doing. And when he went back to his room, I shot myself.
Mm.
So again, like a sane person does not do that. You are not in a rational state of mind in a sense of being able to do any objective sort of thinking.
And I'm
And
curious, what is your relationship with this young man now?
we don't have one.
Okay.
Um, he he came and saw me, and he might have seen me when I was on life support. I don't know because I was out, like out and intubated for a little bit. I know for a fact he came and saw me once while I was awake, and even then, it was kind of he'd been dodging me, and he saw this, so he's the reason that I'm part of the reason that I'm alive. I had planned on shooting myself when he wasn't there. He got home early. He heard that, and he thought that a pot had fallen out in the kitchen, because it was like my room was on one side of the apartment, common area with the kitchen and living room in the middle, and his room was on the other side. And so when he came out and saw that like one of his pots didn't drop, he knocked on my door and I didn't answer. And then he came in and I was slumped on my bed with a hole in my forehead and a gun in my hand. So he had to see that. And then I woke up while he was on the phone with 911, and he's having to deal with that while there's blood pouring out of my head and I'm asking for him for help and I'm blind and don't know it yet. Like I don't remember any of that, but it messed him up. He wound up getting a DUI at some point after I had returned home from the hospital. And outside of that, I've seen him once since all of that. It was probably a little over a year after the fact, but I haven't been in contact with him since. I'm sure he probably struggles with all that stuff. I mean,
And that's the
it's rough.
trauma, right?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
someone else sees that, like that is going to be hard, you know what I mean, for someone to get over. But it's good that you take like, he saved me. Like, that's something you can take from out of that, and I do hope that he is getting the help that he is, and continue to live life, because your plan wasn't for him to see that,
No.
you know.
Or the cops that had to deal with that,
Yeah,
or the EMTs. Yeah.
and so that was it was more of you just doing it so that way you can go the best way. You didn't want no one else to be able to see that or hear that.
Well,
And
and I just wanted out. I wanted an escape. You just that you just want relief from that
Mhm.
pain. It feels like there's no way out, and there
Yeah,
totally is. I just wasn't talking about it. And now I know that's the case because I've obviously dealt with more depression since waking up,
yeah.
finding out that I had blinded myself. But yeah,
And one thing I always tell people is like it is okay to ask someone if they feel in a certain way or if you want to kill yourself, because some people have this stigma, and this is more on the clinical side, right, where they feel like you can't ask that because you might push them towards that direction and stuff.
mm,
Like, do you felt like if somebody would have maybe noticed that you were depressed or maybe noticed maybe isolation or anything, and maybe asked you some prompting question, do you feel like that may have what helped you, make certain decisions or open up and talk to these people? I'm just curious.
I don't know because I really I couldn't even talk about the stuff with my wife at that point. Like it just I'd get sweaty and hot and angry and it never did anything good. So I just I thought it was weak to speak up. I really did because that was, that this suck it up and the embrace the suck and the less clean words of acting in that way absolutely serve a purpose and are necessary in the military and especially in the infantry. I just didn't realize that I needed to turn that off when I got out. And so I held that same state of mind. And I don't, so because I still held that belief very strongly, and there's absolutely still a place for that. Like you can't be soft, but if you're struggling like that, you do need to speak up. And I know that now. I think and this is why I try and be so open about all this stuff now and try and put words to all of these things is I think if I had heard someone who's in my position now talking about this, like we're talking about it, if I had been listening to this podcast almost 6 years ago before I shot myself, I think that would have woken me up.
Mm.
I mean, it's like the may cause cancer warning on a pack of cigarettes,
Yeah, yeah.
And so I like to think that that would have snapped me out of it. I don't know if that's the case, but I think something like that would have.
Okay. Did being blind maybe impacted your like sense of identity or purpose or anything?
Yeah, it was everything because so I woke up and was completely blind and deaf in one ear, had to have facial reconstruction, and I had to relearn everything from like feeding myself and brushing my teeth all the way up to it was everything. And even so, I was in the hospital for 51 days. And then I went to blind rehab for 2.5 months and learned basic blind guy skills like how to use a cane and how to use screen reading software on a computer, like I used to connect to this call. Um, but when I got out of there, like really the only thing that I had was I was chasing getting back into some of these old things that I used to do. So I was snowboarding 8.5 months after I shot myself. I didn't know how to cook for myself or do anything, but I was snowboarding, and that gave me a taste of that independence back because I had had someone doing everything for me outside of, when I would go to the gym for that entire time. And so I shot myself in March. I was snowboarding in December and I was back in college in January. And at that point, it wasn't what I wanted to do because I was in college for nursing after I got out of the Marines. And I've looked everywhere. You can't do that when you're totally blind. It's just that's a liability. It's no one would let me do it. So I started going for clinical psychology, but even then, that was like how can I make this a positive? How can I turn my suicide attempt and me maiming myself and losing everything? How can I make that where I wasn't my own undoing
Mm.
almost? And along that line of when I was in college, I hit a lot of roadblocks in terms of barriers of my materials not being accessible for me to access. And by the time that I was hitting those, because 6 months after I'd gotten back in college, I was living back out on my own. And again, like I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just kind of stumbling my way through things. And I didn't really have a purpose, but at some point I was hitting all these barriers in college. And it basically with the screen reading software that I use, like when to connect to Zoom, I can connect to Zoom, but I can't even get online and pay my water bill by myself. I had to have someone help me set up auto pay. But then I can get on the App Store on my iPhone, but then I can't get on, TikTok and all that stuff. all that stuff is dependent on the code that was written for each app or website. Like developers have to take steps to make these things accessible. And when I was getting frustrated with my schoolwork being inaccessible, I started researching what caused that. And that's when I found out that it was the code. And I ended up dropping out of college to teach myself how to code so that I could make software that looks and functions normally for people without disabilities, but it's also accessible for virtually anybody with a physical disability, whether you're colorblind or totally blind like I am, or even people who are completely deaf and blind can use the software that I make, or people with no arms can use it with their voice. And that was in October of 2021. And that was like the first taste of something where like I felt like I kind of had a purpose. And but I also, well, at the same time, it's dipped my toe back into alcohol again. I hadn't realized that I was an alcoholic. And I think that's another thing. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that because alcohol, looking back, had obviously been an issue leading up to my suicide attempt.
Okay.
I just didn't get that concept of, hey, once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic, just because you stopped drinking for a little bit. Um,
So what is something that you said you wanted my like outlook on it? Like what is that exactly so I can be able to answer that for you?
well, I guess in when the first night that I drank again, it was like I had never stopped. Like it immediately became an issue, and within I don't know if it was a couple days or a couple of weeks, I had reached the point where I was suicidal and I self-admitted to the VA hospital. And it was because of the alcohol. I mean, I wasn't in a good spot, but I meant more so in the sense of, is that something that comes up a lot for you as a substance use counselor where, you know, like once you have formed an addiction, even if there was a period of sobriety, like that addiction is still there. It's just not active.
So,
That's what I was asking you about.
so that's something that we, as a therapist, I try to not instill that into the clients because if you do, then they
Okay.
think it's always a problem. It's always a problem,
Mm,
right? We want you to understand, you know, you could get over it. It might take time. You might have to go to like AA. You might, some people get a sponsor or anything like that, right? But some people will say, you know, drinking alcohol, it is a disease. So sometimes to me, I try to kind of move a little bit away from that because then you get stuck to that stigma, right? It's like, well, I'm always a drinker, I'm always going to drink. Well, then if you have that mindset, you might continue to drink because to me, it's like giving yourself the okay. Like I'm an alcoholic. Well, yes, you struggle with alcohol. Yes, you know you have things that you overcome. But when we look at people with sobriety, people still will talk about their alcohol use years down the road, right? And you
yeah.
learn how to cope around it and be around it. You know the cravings, you know the triggers and stuff like that. So I think like with you know how you mentioned it, it's like some people, and I try to educate them as well. When we think about alcohol, alcohol is more of a down. It's like a depressant, right?
Yeah.
It it makes you like just kind of just slump and just relax and like you want to forget the whole world and everything like that. It already produces this mood already. So could you imagine? When you're already drinking something and already mentally feeling down or depressed, already feeling hopeless, that's going to push you over the edge a lot more. And so sometimes
Yeah.
I try to tell people, it's like, when you're already trying to get to that bottom and you're already feeling at your low, there's no necessarily turning back. So with me, my mindset is just kind of letting people know, like, if you want to continue to say you're an addict or you're an alcoholic, that's your decision. But you can always get to the other side of the coin. You can also beat that. And that to me is sometimes that's being around people who may have been in your same situation, right? Because if you got a person who's been a drinker and they hear your story, that might scare them. Like, no, I don't want to do that, right? That might deter them
Yeah.
away from that. But everybody's journey is a little bit different. Everybody has to learn a little bit differently. Like with you, it wasn't your time to go. It was not. You could you imagine how other people who was successful suicide, right? And where you didn't cross that line. And so me as a therapist, I do it like the suicide walks and stuff like that. And I really, really try to understand as much as I can because me personally, I don't have that in my family or anything, and so really try to understand that. So for the substance use, I do know people use that outlet of a way to just drown in their pain and stuff like that, and
Yes, an escape.
that escape. So I'm curious, when you was drinking, what type of alcohol was you drinking back then?
It was always liquor.
Yeah,
It didn't matter what. It just had to be liquor.
yeah.
He'd
And
get me
that
drunk faster and he'd get me more drunk. So,
just keep
yeah.
going. Even some
Yeah.
I had some people who experienced that with dark liquor, right? And some certain liquor, depending on what it is, it gets you
Yeah.
aggressive. So if you notice that you get more aggressive, we call it that liquid courage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people see that, but I seen that growing up because my dad was an alcoholic. My dad used to drink like a fish, left and right. It was just from sun up to sundown, and I noticed these behaviors and stuff like that. So but again, back to that question, like I try not to have people stick with that stigma because I want you to be able to feel empowered. I want you to understand, like, that's was you. That's not you now. You don't need to
Yeah.
carry that anymore. And so I think that's why my mindset a lot of times is a little bit different with substance use because I don't want you to feel like you have to carry that 10 years. So 10 years later, I'm alcoholic. Well, you didn't have a drink in 10 years. Are you still
Yeah.
an alcoholic? It's like
Well,
we try to
I
move
didn't
we try to move
go
people
ahead.
away from that.
Yeah. I guess, and I didn't mean this necessarily in the labeling. I meant more so in the fact of, so I just hit a year sober. Like I struggled for about 2.5 years after I picked up the bottle again. And I know if I went and got liquor right now, like and started drinking again, it would restart the problem for
Mm-hmm.
me. Like I meant that more so than
Yeah.
saying I'm an alcoholic for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But
And that's that relapse, right? Like
yeah,
you
yeah,
relapse again, then you're gonna feel that same pain, like crap. Like man, a year. Bravo to you, my man. Like hats off to you for taking that and
thanks.
going and running with that, right? Some people don't make it a week, 30 days. So for you to have that
I
year,
couldn't make it more than 2 days, man, for a while. I would binge for 3 or 4 days or 2 or 3 days and then take a break for 2 or 3 days and then do it again. It was bad.
and
It was really
this is
bad.
something I ask all people that I meet with. What was your motivation for change?
So I knew it was a problem after I first picked it up, especially I would say that night when I wound up self-admitting to the VA hospital, it was clear like, okay, this is an issue. And once I came back from that and then gave into the urge again, then it was clear like, okay, I am addicted to this. It is not a physical addiction. I have the mental addiction for it, like just that weakness where I give into it. And so I knew it was a problem the whole time. And I tried. I kept trying. I ended up attending outpatient rehab and then an inpatient rehab facility. And while I was in inpatient rehab, I got diagnosed with a really nasty genetic disease that's in my family called Huntington's disease. I don't know if you've ever heard of that,
I
but
haven't.
did you have or have
I
not?
have not. What is that?
Okay. It is a degenerative neurological disease. So your brain tissue just starts to die off and it starts to show as a movement disorder, and then you get behavioral issues and then cognitive issues and speech, and eventually all the way down to like where you're pretty much a vegetable. You're like not non-responsive and don't really move a whole lot. Um, it's a nasty disease, but I'd finally taken the step to go to inpatient rehab, and then I got diagnosed while I was there. I'd gotten tested before I went in, and planned to be there so that I would get the results while I was at rehab because I wasn't sure what I would do if like when I found out if I had it. But then that was a new excuse to drink when I got back was my whole point with that. And but I kept trying and it just at some point I I'd reached the point where I didn't think that I'd be able to stop. And I had a friend that had a conversation with me and she was like, this, if you do not stop, this is going to kill you. Because I was getting drunk. It was always blackout drunk. There was no other
Wow.
kind of drunk for me. I would drink until I was blackout drunk and then drink until I passed out. But I would get blackout drunk and then totally blind, go like wander around Denver to
Wow.
try and walk to my jujitsu gym or wherever, I would go on walks and she's like, you're gonna get hit by a car if you don't drink yourself to the point where you choke to death on your puke one night or just drink to the point where your liver fails you. And something about that is the combination of that and knowing with the Huntington's disease stuff, really the only thing there's no cure for Huntington's and no real treatment. The only thing that you can do is take care of yourself. I'm very physically active and I eat clean and I've kind of always been that way. But being an alcoholic is about the worst thing you can do in terms of accelerating the onset of the disease.
Wow.
And I kind of had the choice where, okay, I can sit here and drink until the disease starts to take hold on me, or because I was blacking out half the time. So I would miss these 2 or 3 days where I was binging. I would have no recollection of these days. So I could enjoy the time that I still have, which I've got plenty of time left. But I could be conscious for the time that I have while I'm healthy and enjoy that, or I could drink it away and just be a sad, miserable, rotting core. So that, for whatever reason, started to I don't know if it was a motivator or what, but it's a combination of that. And I started actually telling people when I was getting cravings.
Yep.
And just doing that, telling someone else, because then I couldn't, I would always drink alone.
Yeah.
If I told someone else and then I disappeared for 6 hours, they would know I was drinking. And that's all I needed was that it turned out the whole time, for whatever reason, all I needed was that external accountability. And
There
that
you
wasn't in a
go.
program, but what's
And
that?
and I was gonna say that too. The that part is the accountability.
Yeah.
When
Yep.
you're letting someone know, hey, keep me accountable, you got to take that and understand that they're going to keep you accountable. So it's amazing that you got to that point and now you realize. To me, your motivation was to change is you want to continue to live life. You don't want, to alcohol to outlive you. You want to live life. You want to be able to
Yeah.
preserve as much, you got going on in the world. And so sometimes people don't get to that point to see that. Like I said, my dad passed away. He had liver failure. He was drinking like a fish and stuff like that. I mean, in and out of treatment and stuff, but he just kept going. It just kept going,
Yeah.
kept going. And, so you had an opportunity to be able to realize, you know what, I can't keep doing that. So, and keep on, like they say, take it one day at a time. You sound like you're so busy with so many things, it's going to keep you there. So I'm grateful for that. I'm curious, what was your support system like throughout like coming back home, going through, all this, the personal struggles and stuff like that? How do they continue to support you now?
My family has always been, even like when I was in the hospital, my family was up there pretty much every day. Um, I don't really have much of a relationship with my mom anymore, but like my dad, my sisters, I'm still close. I don't know. I stick to my own a lot socially. I go out and do stuff, but yeah, it's I've got the friends that I do have are like very strong, very close friends that I can depend on for anything. And that's really what matters. I mean, those are the people who even it just like that was my accountability system too. Just leaning on those connections.
I'm curious, is there any like misconception about blindness and mental health? Like, do you think they like go hand in hand with certain things?
Um, I think I definitely I feel there's a lot of misconceptions around blindness stuff, and I think at the same time I'm part of I would say more of a minority in the blind community than the majority with all the stuff that I do. You know, I ski, I rock climb, I whitewater
Mhm.
kayak, compete in Brazilian jiu-jitsu against people without any disabilities. I taught myself how to code and started my own business. I'm writing a book, I do public speaking and all these other things. And people people assume when they meet me that, you know, I have to have someone who I have to like live with my parents or you know, any of this stuff. They're shocked that I can actually be productive in life and do any of the things that I do. And I think, you know, I grew up with a younger sister with disabilities, so I'm not that's not a foreign concept to me. And I've seen how independent she can be.
Mhm.
And like blindness really, with all the technology that's out there, it's pretty incredible what I can still do. I can't drive. And that's the for the most part, I can if I can find people who are willing to give me a shot, like with the finding a gym who was willing to work with the blind guy for Brazilian jiu-jitsu, like you can kind of bend the world, you can make it accessible through those connections and these just trying going out there and like with that drive to do things. And I would say that's the big misconception is
Right.
it's thinking that because I'm blind, I'm like incapable of doing anything, but also just people get weird. Definitely, it seems to be people who haven't been around people with disabilities are just very. You can tell sometimes it's tense where they're like, I don't know how to act, and it's just I'm just a normal dude. I've had a normal life, and I probably do just as much as you do, if not more.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
And
that's the big
I
one.
think from the other end, I do feel that way because, I used to help out with elderly that had like Medicaid and stuff. And I remember I was helping this lady that was blind. And so I would go to her house and help clean this stuff. And so in my mind, I'm like, I will try to hold the door for her and stuff like that. And she was like, no, I could do this on my own. Like, I'm like,
Yeah,
okay. But in my mind, I'm not really thinking that. And so one day we sat down and she wanted me to help her find a prescription on her phone. And so she gave me her phone and I'm trying to, I'm like, what's going on with your phone? But she had whatever it is and it was just skimming through stuff so quickly. I'm like,
the screen reader. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And and so she laughed at me. She was like, well, I guess I can navigate my phone better than you. I'm like, I have no clue what's going on in your phone. It was
yeah,
just so amazing to see the technology. And that's something that I know that you're in the developments of now working on your own technology and stuff. But I also just learned from her. It's just like she said, just treat her the way I would treat anyone else. And that made me think a lot more because she lived on the fourth floor. And I'm like, why are you living on the fourth floor? But she will walk, I mean, she walked down and up the stairs better than me. She had a big dog that she was walking. And I would just look at her all the time. I was like, man, I'll be tripping over my own foot sometimes.
yeah,
But that just lets me know it's like, no matter what disability you have, I'm going to continue to treat you like who you want to be treated. It doesn't matter because I
yeah,
realize you probably better than some things than me, and I have my eyes. Me having my vision doesn't necessarily dictate that. And so when I seen that, it was just amazing just building this rapport with her. Like she knew where I misplaced or put her bowls and stuff in the wrong place. She's like, nope, it belongs over there. I'm looking like, how do
yeah,
you know that?
yeah.
you know,
It's
and,
interesting, man. Your body it just and so I like I said, totally blind, deaf in one ear, no sense of smell, and so my taste is really dull too. But the one ear that I have has gotten incredibly sensitive. And I feel like my awareness of my surroundings has, like, just my spatial awareness of things. And
Okay.
it's crazy how your body adapts to it.
Yeah.
It is so crazy.
It's kind of like it has to, right? Like
Yeah.
it has to. It just like you said, just your body, adapt to that. So that's it's pretty interesting. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, any like strategies and things that you felt like you use right now to maintain a lot of just that emotional like resilience, right? How are you navigating just through challenges now? Or are there any challenges you feel like emotionally?
Yeah, I'm very active. So I lift weights 6 days a week and go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 3 or 4 days a week as well. And on the day that I don't lift, I do an hour on the Peloton, which I hate. But like doing things like that you don't like that are hard are there's that in itself builds resiliency in my opinion. And I've my alcoholism had gotten so bad that I really had drank away my stress tolerance. Like
Mm,
because anytime I was getting stressed out, I was just reaching to the bottle instead. And so I've kind of had to rediscover that over the past year. And the being very physically active is a huge part of that. But when I'm not being physically active, my mind is busy too. I'm writing a book. I am writing software to create these apps and things that I want to create to make the world the digital world a more accessible place for everyone. And I'm doing something all day, and I think a lot of people struggle with loneliness, but especially I know a lot of people with disabilities really because of the same things that I just mentioned with people kind of gets people or takes a while to get people to let their guard down or start to treat you more normally and not walk on eggshells around you. It's kind of hard to make friends and stuff like that. I struggle with that and really the with the Huntington stuff, having that looming overhead is something I have to be conscious of because it makes me want to like do things on an accelerated timeline
yeah.
and like rush through everything because I feel like I'm on a limited timeline, even though I mean, I've probably got 20 years before that stuff, 15, 20 years before that stuff starts to set in. And there's so much time there. And like
Yeah.
just taking a step back and realizing that and be like, hey man, you don't have to burn the candle from both ends all the
Yeah.
time. Um, but just honestly, a lot of that is being conscious of it. And something that I've learned through therapy and something that got me through a really, really rough time was, and I was suicidal at this point. This was like, I think it was almost 2 years after I shot myself. I was in a really, really bad spot. But I told my therapist about it. And so I confessed to her that hey, I don't want to be here, but I'm not going to hurt myself. I know this feeling. I learned my lesson. I'm not going to hurt myself. And we started talking every day and sometimes multiple times a day. Just and I'd be bawling on the phone, just talking through stuff. But she she suggested that I do this thing every day where it was essentially meditating, but on what it was that was driving that depression. I would go sit down in a quiet place or lay down and just sit and try and feel feel the depression and acknowledge whatever it was that it like, okay, what is contributing to this right now? Even if it doesn't make sense, like there's something, what am I thinking about as I'm feeling this? And it was identifying things. And then I would have more stuff to talk about. And I still do that now, even outside of therapy, when I'm, like I just said, with trying to have to, or trying to slow myself down and like brush off this weird pressure that I'm putting on myself in the context of the Huntington's disease stuff. Like stepping back and being like, hey, that's not really a rational thing you're doing here. It's not helping you. So let's set it aside and like, okay, there's still some discomfort there, but that those skills have served me so well, just in terms of kind of riding the waves of things. I've been off my antidepressants since sometime in October now. That's I'm doing well. Like I said, I'm sober, and life's not always perfect, but you can things can and will get better. And the more that you deal with them, you learn these tools. And that's the knowledge that I've gained over the last almost 6 years now has really carried me to a place where feel like I can kind of deal with anything at this point.
That's amazing, man. Definitely amazing. Like hats off to you. And just you
Thanks.
just gotta keep doing what you're doing, man. It's just amazing. Tell me a little bit about this book that you're working on.
So it is it's a memoir that dives into everything that I did wrong that led me to the point where I held a gun between my eyes and pulled the trigger, and then everything that's happened since, with from where I am now and everything in between. As we just kind of touched on, there was a lot of ugliness in between then and now, and some big ups and downs. Like I said, 8.5 months after I shot myself, I was living on my own, or was snowboarding. A month after that, I was in college, and 6 months after that, I was living on my own. But that period where I was suicidal happened after that.
Mm,
And then the drinking happened further after that. And then the Huntington's disease stuff happened. And there's been really, really nasty things. But like the one thing that I've come back to is I keep showing up to do the work. And I think, kind of like I said earlier, with had I heard someone in my position now speaking about what their suicide attempt had left them with before I shot myself, I think that could have saved me. And I also think sharing these things in this book could save someone else. And if not, it's at least getting conversations started, because these are a lot of really uncomfortable subjects that people tend to avoid, especially in our society.
mhm.
And I think opening up those discussions are important, just like we're doing right now. Like, some people listening to this are probably going to be uncomfortable with some of the stuff that I talked about, but these are things that need to be talked about. And so that's what the book is. It's really, I'm not proud of a lot of stuff that's in there, um, but I think it needs to be shared, because people, the other side of all this is, you see, okay, he shot himself in the face in 2019, and you see where I am now. But without all of that, the stumbling in the middle, like without sharing that, then that's a disingenuous thing, and that can be dangerous for someone else who's in a hard spot. And you're like, okay, well, just went from that to this, and he was fine. Like, people struggle, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's life. There's hard stuff in life. So that's what the book's about. And I'm getting my own podcast off the ground right now that is supposed to be. I'm a very curious person, and I'm trying to. Some of it has been and will be more conversations with people with just wild stories like mine, where it's either stuff that they've learned the hard way, or stuff that they've overcome, and people working in interesting fields, and just again trying to have in-depth conversations with people like you're doing on here,
Yeah.
where people can extract value from it, and it's not just BS videos that people can scroll through and waste their day watching people do stupid stuff on TikTok.
And I feel like with your book, it's gonna do tremendous. Like to me, and I'm like, man, that could be a movie, right? Because I feel like in today's world, people tiptoe around mental health. People don't want to
Definitely.
talk about it. It's like, no, let's leave that over there. But when something bad happens, now, oh, was they struggling with something? It's like, no, like we have to be able to talk about that. Like we've been through so much in our life, in our world, through COVID and stuff like that. The way we are coping with things is a little bit different. So the more and more people are talking about that, it will open up eyes. And that's probably one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Like I told myself I wanted a podcast that's different, because some people do stuff about technology, all this different other stuff. And I'm like, I can't do that. Like I'm a therapist at heart. I love helping people. I want to hear people's story. I want people's stories to get out there. So when I thought about that, it's like I want those, because to me, that's what people want to hear. That's what people are going to learn from. They may not necessarily been through the same walks of life, but I guarantee you somebody like, man, I've been in that dark space before. I used to drown my sorrows in that bottle, or I was taking these pills or anything like that. It doesn't matter how we started, is where we going at the end of the day. And so I commend you, just and continue to enjoy life. Your book is going to do amazing. And so when it does come out, I definitely be looking out for that. And
Okay.
I'm curious, and just me just knowing that you are blind, will that be, and this is probably some of the stuff that, I want you to touch on with your app. Like, will that just be in like Braille or anything like that? Like, what would that look like?
Sorry, my computer started talking over you. I heard with your app, and then I heard what would that look like?
Yeah, so your book, I'm curious, is that also going to be like in Braille and stuff? Because I know you talked about like your app where it will have like Braille or something like that. So I'm just curious
Yeah.
with the book.
So the book, it's I'm working on the second draft right now, and part of this, the publishing process is from everything that I've seen so far is going to be a nightmare.
Yep,
There's a lot to it, but in terms of the digital formats, I'm not quite sure what platforms it'll be on, but if it's
gotcha.
not in, because some of that is dependent on how it gets published, but if it's published in a digital format, it should work with these like the refreshable braille displays because that technology exists outside of the software that I've made. My software that I've written just leverages those technologies and allows them to work by
Gotcha.
providing the data that they need, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that'd be amazing. When do you foresee like this book being finally done?
Dude, it's so hard to tell. So I started writing it in the middle of last January. I think it was
Okay.
January 18th when I started it, and I finished the first draft on Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow. Okay. So,
Um, and I wrote just about every day in
hmm,
that time. But part of that, I've done some revisions in that initial writing process. So I don't know. It's so hard to judge with all of it because there's some days where I sit in front of the computer and like I cannot figure out how to rewrite whatever section I'm stuck on, and you just sit there for a couple hours, like barely make any progress. But I don't know. I can't really. I don't have a good timeline on it, but I post about it on my social media and stuff, and I've got a newsletter on my website at
mhm.
zachtidwell.net where people can sign up and I've had the mailing list for a couple months. I don't send anything out. It's just there for when there's news with the book. When I finally do have stuff to announce that people will get mail about it.
That is amazing. I can't wait for it to come. I would definitely check that out and read it. I mean, because there's a lot, right? Your story is a lot, and I'm glad that you are putting that out there. I'm glad that you're giving people an opportunity to hear your story, and, your trials and tribulation, the things that you've been through. And this is why I say you a true testament of resilience. Like, you're doing things that most people who have all full functions isn't doing. You're not letting anything stop you. You're still getting up and going. You're working out 6 days a week and doing so many different things. Man, that is resilience at itself. That is very, very impressive. And I'm glad that
Thanks.
you have that drive. I'm glad that you have that will and you see life does not stop. And so continue to keep that up. That is amazing.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. And last piece, let's talk about your app. I know you're developing an app. Let me know the name of the app and stuff like that, so we can follow that. What platform is it on? If it's out yet, I'm curious to know.
So I had an app that is actually probably just now off of the App Store within the last like 48 hours.
Oh,
I didn't have time to keep up with it. I am working on a new project. I can't really announce like the name of it yet because I'm still trying to figure out that process. But the one that was out did well. It won some awards for the accessibility stuff that I did on that side of it. It was a word puzzle game, but
Word.
yeah, this next thing will be cross-platform, and it'll be it's in the education space.
Wow.
So
So for
yeah,
those who ever wanted to get into stuff like that, like what is the first starting point? Where direction do they need to go? I'm curious because I always
for
thought about like
programming.
creating an app or like a mental health app where it has different type of advice and people different things. So I'm just curious in general if anybody want to start an app, like what direction is that first step?
I literally taught myself from reading articles online.
Wow.
So I Googled, I figured out you have to figure out what devices you want to be on, right? So like what operating systems you want to be on.
Mhm.
So my first app was on the Apple App Store for iPhones and only for iPhones. So I picked Apple's programming language, which was Swift, and I learned that and learned the front end frameworks for all that and just kept building. And now because this next thing that I'm building will be cross-platform and on the web, I've had to learn a new language and a new framework. And I keep Googling. When I have questions, I Google and I learn that way. And after you learn your first language, the concepts at least carry over. The implementation is different because the syntax of the language is different, which are basically like the grammatical rules of the language and where braces belong and where brackets belong and these other characters and things like that. But the concepts carry over. And so like learning this next language and framework has been way faster than it was with the first one. But yeah,
I mean, that's awesome. Like I said, I always thought about wanting to do it. I don't know which direction to go, but again, you're doing it. You're an amazing Zach. You're doing things that so many people only dream of, only dream of. So thank you, and giving me the opportunity to just hearing your story, And I want you to continue, living out your dream. I want you to continue your sobriety. Let's get a couple more years under your belt and stuff like that.
yeah.
Let's keep going. Um, any advice or any last words for my audience, the people who might be watching, anything you want to give or share? I'm curious.
My big thing that I always say is it can and will get better, but you have to choose because it is a choice. You have to choose to show up and do the work. That's why I'm still alive today. I learned from my mistake the first time. And even during, the depression that I've had to deal with since shooting myself, I would argue is probably worse than the first time around because a lot of it has been when I was sober and I've had to feel the full weight of it. And a lot of it was dealing with the fruits of my own labors from shooting myself. I completely changed my life forever. And I'm still here because I chose to do the work. And it may not seem like it will get better, but you have to speak up. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It's talking to someone and voicing those things out loud. There's I believe it's because when we have conversations with people, even now as we're talking and as you're talking to me and as I'm talking to you, we're both at least subconsciously considering how the other is going to perceive what we're saying.
Yeah.
You do the same thing in therapy whether it's to a therapist or talking to a friend, when you externalize those things, you start to view it from a more objective perspective because you're viewing it from how someone else would view it, not your whatever nasty internal dialogue you've got going on. And I think that really is such a big factor in talk therapy and why that works. So that is my word to the wise.
You heard it from Zach himself. Thank you, Zach, for coming to the therapy corner and talking about your life. Continue, advocating, continue speaking, continue talking to people, and just helping other people. Because the more people are doing that with these life experience, the more that we can help people and understand. You do not need to be in the dark all the time. You do not need to do this by yourself. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I wish you well in life. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
You have a good one and Happy New Year.
You too.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.